All right, so we're getting into some deep water here. Job, it says in chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, after this, and we've just had the first two chapters where he was attacked mercilessly, we might say, two different levels. First of all, his possessions and his children, and then his body, and he is in excruciating pain. And we remember that Satan's idea is that God is not worthy of worship, and the only reason anybody would worship him is because we bless him. So when that didn't work, well, the only reason that Job still worships you is because you did not touch him personally, his body. So Job is in excruciating pain now, and so it says, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job spoke and said, and we'll get to what he said in just a moment. So, it's after the tragedy, the affliction, and it's also after the initial incredible, very positive compassion of his friends, where they sit and are astounded, and they're silent, and they mourn with him. And so then Job begins to speak. And so what did Job speak, and what did he not speak? What did he curse, and what did he not curse?
He didn't curse God.
He did not curse God. He cursed the day he was born. But he did not curse God. So in chapter 3 begins to unveil a different aspect of the battle that Job has. We've seen, and not that he didn't have this in chapters 1 and 2, but now we're going to focus on the battle that's going on in his mind, in his soul. He's not losing any more stuff. He's not losing any more family. He's not, so far as we know, his pain is not getting any worse, his physical pain. So now there is an incredible unraveling of the emotional, psychological, spiritual anguish. So what does he think about his suffering? And this book is very helpful for us, because when we are in the midst of our suffering, how we think about it is either going to make it worse or make it better, or at least not make it any worse. So the things he says are understandable. His emotions are understandable. He's got, now let's remember, he's got this unspeakable loss of family and possessions, and what does he do? He worships. But now there is this agonizing battle in the mind, and again, we have been introduced to Job's friends, and it is common to speak of them as Job's comforters in a negative way. And I think it would do well for us to remember that they started out quite well. And remember this, they did not see Job when he was first hit with all this and when he worshiped. As far as we know, they didn't hear him say, the Lord gave and the Lord took away, blessed be the name of the Lord. They just walk in and they see him in this state. And they manifest a great compassion in their silence and in just being there. And what's the next thing that happens? Job opens his mouth. Now, I'm not justifying anything that these guys are going to say, but just think about it. If you'd been one of those comforters, and you come there and you are utterly astounded and speechless as to what he's going through, you don't really know about the worship he has given to the Lord, you don't understand any of this, but you're there just trying to be a comforter, and then Job opens his mouth and begins to spew out a bunch of stuff. it would be very easy for us to be self-righteous and try to give Job a lesson or two. And so often, when somebody says something and it's off base, without any thought of what they may be going through that we don't know about, we so quickly pontificate. Man, he's turned his back on the Lord, or he's not expressing faith, or I never would have thought I would have heard him say that. We need to be careful. There's not a single one of us in here that knows the deep heart issues of any other of us. And you might learn and you say, that's nothing. Well, that's because it's not yours. What looks like a molehill to me in your life is a mountain in your life. I'm not justifying, I'm just saying this is the way life is. And you could look at something for me and say, well, that's just a molehill. What you so upset about? Well, it's a mountain to me. The reason it's only a molehill to you is because it's not your mountain or your molehill. So while there is, as we go along, there's plenty of justification for calling these guys Job's comforters in a negative way. But again, had we been there, I'm not sure we would have done better. So, verse 3 through 10. May the day perish on which I was born, and the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. May the darkness and the shadow of death claim it. May a cloud settle upon it. May the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, may darkness seize it. May it not rejoice among the days of the year. May it not come into the number of the months. Oh, may that night be barren. May no joyful shout come into it. May those curse it who curse the day. Those who are ready to arouse Leviathan, may the stars of the morning be dark. May it look for light and have none, and not see the dawning of the day, because it did not shut up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide sorrow from my eyes. Now, I'll tell you what we're not going to do in our study. We're not going to take verse by verse and try to give explanations of a lot of this stuff. We're going to look for principles and what's the main theme here, and try to get some application from it. So obviously, one of the main things that's happening here is that Job said, may the day that I was born, on which I was born, perish. He cursed the day he was born, and he curses the night of his conception. It would have been better had I not been born, rather than to have this catastrophe of affliction that won't go away. There is all manner of unspeakable tragedy that happens, and when it's on your plate, you say things that are the overflow of a grieving heart that if it was you, you would not want someone to hold you literally accountable for everything you said. And so there are a lot of people, I know the Holy Spirit moved, we think probably after all of this is when the Holy Spirit moved Job's pen to write. We think Job was the one who wrote this. And now he's probably writing from a place of understanding. But even so, it probably is accurate, just trying to figure out a way to look at this, that some have called the style of writing a bit poetic. In other words, there's literal truth being presented here, but there is exaggeration, and again, there's no call to call Job to extreme account of blasting him as an unbeliever or blasting him for saying harsh things toward God? Have you ever been in a situation where you said harsh things toward God? So there's one place where he calls God his enemy. Again, these are words of passion. I don't believe he literally believed that God was his enemy. He again is despising the day he was born. He wanted that day to be wiped off the calendar of history. But he makes these strong statements against God, which would be making strong statements against, you could say he's accusing God of mismanagement of his life. Going back to Genesis, God said, "Let there be light." In Job 3:4, "As for that day, let there be darkness." And so he's venting his feelings. I'm not trying to justify anything. I'm just saying we have here, we can show up on Sunday morning having had an incredible week of failure. But we walk in the building, we put on our smiles, we put on our placard, "I have my act together and I don't have any needs." And it's hard for us to be really real to each other. And there are some things that we just need to work out between ourselves and God. But we do need to be real. And again, this is not a stamp of approval just to say, sometimes it's better to, instead of expressing your frustrations or your doubts, it's better to confess worship. And that's what Job did on the front end. And he will do that throughout the other chapters on occasions. He did not just totally lose faith. One Puritan writer said, "Job roareth and rages beyond all reason, and had not the Spirit held him back, he would surely have run headlong into blasphemy and desperation, which was Satan's design." You say, "Well, I don't know where the justification of that is." Well, I think the justification for that statement is in the nature of God. And we know that in Peter's case, Jesus told Peter, "This is going to be happening to you from Satan, but I prayed for you." And we could have been looking on the outside and gotten self-righteous against Peter for denying the Lord, for cursing. Again, we're not giving justification for those things, but we're facing the reality. And the good news for every one of us here is that God doesn't just zap us and write us off when we're in such a state. Now, he says, "May those curse it who curse the day." This is likely a reference to the ancient sorcerers who would bring curses. I don't believe that Job was aligning himself with them. I don't believe he believed in their mystical power, but he's speaking from a spirit of despair. And then we have this is the first reference in the Bible to the Leviathan. And it's mentioned a number of times in Job. And in ancient history, it was often associated with sailors or fishermen. Again, not as if Job did justify this practice, but only it is a rash and passionate wish that they would pour forth so many curses undeservedly and would bestow their deserved curse upon this day. Current mythology used the term of Leviathan for a monster of chaos who lived in the sea. Now again, Job was monotheistic. He believed in the one God. This is vivid imagery. Leviathan means twisting one. In Psalms, it is used and spoken of as a sea serpent, as a sea creature. In Isaiah 51 and Psalm 89, it speaks of a serpent associated with the sea. And in Job 26, it refers to God's piercing defeat of a fleeing serpent. Now we know, of course, that Satan is often referred to as a dragon or as a serpent. So this may well be a serpent-like manifestation of Satan in some way. The Puritan writer John Trapp said, it is said that he avoided discussion of Leviathan altogether. Quote, "If I should go about to show the reader with all the several opinions of interpreters, I would not only tire him out, but also be put in danger as the teacher," he didn't identify who this was, "a teacher who testified at the end of his last lecture. He said that both Job and himself were very glad to be rid of one another. For as he understood little or nothing of Job's meaning, so Job seemed to him to be more tormented with his emotional response here and all of these things he's bringing up, more so than he was with the physical pain." Now, yea or nay about all that, but here's what came to me as I thought about all that. Let's say that you have an incredible circumstance on your plate. It may be physical pain, it may be financial setback, it may be chaos and agony and family issues, somebody you work with, and how we think about this and how we get emotionally involved in thinking about this can cause much more agony than the circumstance itself. And so, regardless of how we place all of this out and how we understand all of this, that is certainly a reality for us. And this may well have been a part of what is being communicated here. And again, I'm with those who, instead of giving a long list of all the possible interpretations, and at the end of the day we don't know, let's just realize that we are looking at the unveiling of Job's mind and his emotions and his thoughts when he's in an incredible situation. And if we've ever had such a situation, a lot of our thoughts don't make any sense either. Or they come out unbalanced, focused only on the negative, closed down to the positive. And again, you have to take the book of Job as a whole, because this is not an absolute with Job, because we see him continually coming back to maintain or to confess faith. So, just to advance a little bit, so if you're trying to speak with someone, instead of lecturing them about how they're wrong, instead of lecturing them dogmatically that they're in this position because of their sin, it's a good place to listen, it's a good place to pray, and a good place to look for some truth of God, just to lay it out there and leave it, and hopes that God will bring it to fruition. In verse 11 through 19, he longs for the grave. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Why did the knees receive me? Why the breast that I should nurse? For now I would have lain still and been quiet. I would have been asleep, Then I would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, who built ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not laid hidden like a stillborn child, like infants who never saw the light? There the wicked cease from troubling. There the weary are at rest. There are the prisoners rest together. They do not hear the voice of the oppressor. The small and the great are there. The servant is free from his master. So why did I not perish when I came from the womb? He's complaining. He's in misery. And he's crying out in his pain that it would have been far better had he never survived. And it seems like that he believes in soul sleep. Soul sleep. And it seems like he has all these people saved or lost all in the same place for eternity with having no problem. But again, while it may seem that way, I personally do not believe that that is what he really believed. Because there's some other scriptures later on that would lead us to say, again, he is speaking from a time when, have you ever said more than you knew? And you started pontificating, and you just, sometimes we can get enthralled with listening to ourselves talk, or we can talk to try to cover up the pain or whatever. One person said, it cannot be emphasized too strongly that the startling sentiments expressed in this speech do not mean that Job was cracked under the strain. And what I mean by that is that there is no sense that we don't find Satan ever being able to go before the Lord and say, see, I told you. So for whatever is going on here, the testimony of Scripture is not that Satan was right. But there's something else here. One brother said, the Lord's testing is not to find out if Job can sit unmoved like a piece of wood. Job does not win the Stoic Award of the year. And I don't think any of us do either. But so if you and I had a diatribe like all of this, a little bit later in a better situation, we might look back and say, please don't publish this. Please don't let anybody know I said this. I didn't really mean that. Now, again, there's a lot we don't know here, but we know in the ultimate, as we take it as a whole, Satan did not win the day. And we see here a man pouring out his heart. And it is not necessarily wrong for us to do that if in the final analysis we will let God straighten out our muddled thinking. Again, on this soul sleep thing, for now I would have lain still and been quiet, and I would have been asleep. Some believe that Job embraced the false doctrine of soul sleep, that people die and they're in the grave in a suspended state and then finally resurrected on the last day. Well, here's what I want to just hammer down on that. So I want to leave Job and go to the New Testament. 2 Corinthians 5, 6 through 8 teaches that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. If the Christian is not alive on this earth, he is in the presence of God and not in a suspended state in a grave. Philippians 1:21, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And Job himself, in chapter 19, for I know that my Redeemer lives, And at the last day he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another. Strong. Here is, we believe, the first book that was written as far as time-wise, or it's an ancient book, but he had a clear understanding of the resurrection. But he talks about in verse 13, chapter 3, verse 13, of the wicked. There the wicked cease from troubling. And we live in a time when a lot of people say, and we see it, all it has to do is somebody to die and they say, well, he's in a better place. That's an old theology. But in reality, the wicked do not cease from troubling. Their trouble increases. The prisons do not rest. The wicked do not live in a place of emotional happiness in their death. Here is a quote from the time of the Columbine murderers. Two of the murderers who left behind a videotape document spelling out their motivation, and in the last section of the tape that was shot the morning of the murders, these two guys are dressed and they were ready for what they call our little judgment day. And then looking tense into the camera, they say goodbye. One of them says goodbye to his parents, and he says, I didn't like life too much. Just know I'm going to a better place than here. Now that's the deception of the multitudes. Again, the book of Job is not a theological book of certainty. He brings things up out of the agony of his soul, and it's not very clear. And you could spend time debating this and debating that, and yet there is certainty. We just read it there in the middle chapter, chapter 19, I think it was, of his clear statement on the resurrection. Again, one of the Puritan writers said, Job meddles not here with their eternal state after death, or the sentence and judgment of God against wicked men, of which he speaks hereafter, but only speaks of their freedom from worldly troubles, which is the only matter of his complaint and present discord. And see, I think that's on target. I think this is what we're looking at. When he's talking about, he's expressing the escape from this present world's agonies and troubles and trials. He's not making a theological statement about eternity or what happens in that lane. But be that as it may, we do live in a world where, and it happens at multitudes of funerals, where there is this mindset that, well, they've gone to a better place, and there's a denial of the gospel. All right, so in 20 through 26, why go on living? Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death, but it does not come, and search for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes before I eat, and my groanings pour out like water. For the thing that I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, for trouble comes. And one of the brothers said, "But it is observable that Job does not lay violent hands upon himself, nor do anything to hasten or procure his death. Notwithstanding all of his miseries and complaints, he was contented to wait all the days of his appointed time until his change came." Job 14:14. In other words, in all of this despair, there's no indication that he ever considered suicide. And that's a very common thing, increasingly so. That's one of the things that COVID-19, the aftermath and the pressures of all of that, is increased suicide. Job was hedged in. And it's very interesting that Satan said the only reason he worships you is because you have hedged him in. That is, you've hedged him in with blessings. Now Job says, now that he's in all this agony, God has hedged me in. God has trapped me in this place, and there's no way out. Satan invaded his life to try to create harm. And Job feels like God has put another hedge, and he's locked into this suffering. Instead of a wall of protection to keep Satan out, now there is a wall of affliction that keeps Job in. So Job was not a stoic. He did not keep a stiff upper lip in the midst of his calamity. Such an emotionless Christian life is never presented to us in the Bible as an ideal. Some people have felt like Job blew it and brought a lot of this stuff on himself. It says that the thing that I greatly feared has come upon me. The charismatic world picks up on that, a lot of them. And so you name it and claim it. If you name and claim the wrong thing, this is what you get. You named it, you got it. Well, that's a bunch of hooey. What we see here is that Job, though he was a rich man and a blessed man, he did not live a happy-go-lucky life. He was not oblivious to life as it really was. He interceded for his children. He tried to keep close current accounts with God. This is not something to down him for. This is a great testimony of the life that Job lived before the trouble came. He was a godly man. So, this is Job's first speech, and he's in great depression and great despair. But let me read you this. "I was lying upon my couch during this last week, and my spirits were sunken so low that I could weep by the hour like a child. And yet I knew not what I wept for. But a very slight thing will move me to tears just now. And a kind friend was telling me of some poor old soul living near who was suffering very great pain, and yet she was full of joy and rejoicing. I was so distressed by hearing of that story and felt so ashamed of myself that I did not know what to do, wondering why I should be in such a state as this, while this poor old woman who had a terrible cancer was in the midst of frightful agony, could nevertheless rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory." Who said that? C.H. Spurgeon. Greatly used of God, a man of faith, had a lot of physical ailments that were very painful, and battled depression big time. But when you read all the things that he says, he will come back around to faith. He'll come back around to clinging to God. So the last verses of chapter 3 seem hopeless and uncontrolled and unbroken mourning, but he's not brooding. He's not cursing God. There's we see this from the Psalms. The one person that you don't have to be afraid of offending by being honest is God. And the psalmist's example is this order so often. God, are you going to forget me forever? Where are you, God? Are you sleeping? The psalmist says all manner of things, but he will end with praise. And so we start out this way. Lord, I know you're good and great, but, and then we end with our long tirade of our agony. And the psalmist would say, here's my deal, and I don't know where you are, and are you going to forsake me? But God. And he ends with worship and praise. And that's a good note for us to end on.